Okay, let's come back together. So I'm going to ask some of you just to tell me what you've identified as your biggest upsets or challenges on the job. Who would like to begin? Okay, great. And we have some mics that people are going to take around to you. So over there and then over here. Please go ahead, yeah?
So we spoke about how, as frontline workers, we have priorities that the youth don't share. So we think they should be dealing with their court cases, they should be dealing with all of the things that we think are important, but they have other things that are important. So it kind of feels, some people use the language of not getting through or not following through, but that we have expectations that they just don't meet. And you constantly feel like you're spinning your wheels and you're trying to help them, but it may not be the help that they want.
Got it. And how do you feel about that?
Oh, it's frustrating.
Frustration. Okay.
It's saddening sometimes because you see young people put themselves in situations where they're more at risk.
Right. Got it. Okay, thank you. And yes, please go ahead.
Hi. One of our biggest challenges we were talking about was when we're working with youth and we have these expectations for them and we create a plan for them and they go out and they try to do it and then let's say they have a breakdown or they can't handle it and it just stops. Our hardest thing was trying to rebuild that plan again and trying to figure out what to do with a youth that can't complete something that we want them to do.
And how do you feel about that?
It's tough being patient because sometimes it happens over and over, and you just have to keep trying new things, so it can be frustrating.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Over here, yeah.
So similar with the transient population, but we also talked about this sense of helplessness, and that's that we see the pain of the youth, and for me specifically, it's seeing the pain of the youth and knowing that really, in essence, there's not much I can do other than to be present, to build a relationship, and hopefully that'll trigger something in them to connect and recommunicate. But it's that, we talked a lot about that sense of helplessness.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So our table, we actually spoke more about the challenges with our colleagues.
Colleagues, yeah.
And how our colleagues may or may not be working with the youth. So the challenge of feeling in the moment that you're being very, very present, but then seeing your colleague maybe not be present, and that the structures in which we're working in actually kind of set that up. So. And that causes difficulty, and then how to create the space, though, to be able to have that kind of a conversation. And also knowing that within that conversation, you have to reflect on where you're coming from. But also having the time and the capacity to be able to do that in our day-to-day.
So the challenges of working with people whose working style is different from yours, and about whom you may have some critical feelings or critical opinions, and how do you deal with that? Got it, thank you.
You're welcome.
And where does that lead you with? Yeah, what does that leave you with?
Sorry,
in terms of how you end up feeling about that? Is it frustration again?
Yeah, I would say it's probably, in my experience, and I'm just going to speak for me, sorry guys.
Sure.
It's draining, I think, more than anything.
Draining.
It's a tiring, oh, okay, here we go. We have an add-on.
Yeah, okay, so.
Cut you off. Oh, you can, it's okay. Okay,
So it's also just for me an insane sense of responsibility and not giving up. For some reason, that's my personality. So I do call it a little crazy because at some point you kind of might have to give up or at least change your tactic. But we can't really influence much in a young person's life, but we can control how we treat them and how we're present. So when I can't find that in other people, I get angry.
So you get angry?
Yeah, I do.
Got it. So you're so present and they're not, that you get angry with them.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily fair because I need to extend
No, I understand.
presence with youth to my coworkers.
Yeah.
They're all human beings, and I do get
Yeah,
I do
but
get how that doesn't make sense.
no, but you're talking about how your emotions work.
Oh yeah, that's my emotions for
Yeah,
sure.
got it. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Somebody else? Thank you.
We talk a lot in our group in relation to the helplessness that you feel
Yeah.
in regards to the reoccurring youth that you see, because we work with a transient population, they will be with you for a very short time.
Yeah.
And age appropriately, you see them come, it's like a cycle. They come and you work so much and you do all the skills and apply all the necessary requirements that you think, like the table in the front I said before, like you would think that they need to do their court and they do all that stuff. They leave you, they go someplace else, and then they return, and then the cycle starts all over.
Yeah.
So the hopelessness and the helplessness, as frontline worker, I think that we take that on because you question yourself to see, am I doing something right? So it's like a self-assessment that you do of yourself. What
So-
am I doing? What am I not doing?
See, you get to be, you feel very responsible,
Yeah,
and you feel self-critical sometimes.
that is true.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, anything else? Anyone else? Over here, thank you.
Thank you. One of the comments that was going around our table was the effort involved in engaging each unique individual and how much that takes of us to bring forth the presence in each of those encounters, and how those numbers constantly change, and how it's a very sweet challenge, but it is one of the challenges that we face, to consistently be in that now with an ever-changing audience.
Okay, so this has to do with, I think a number of you mentioned this, that the relative shortness of your contact with these people, is that it? So that you don't have time to establish that presence or that relationship, and you see new people all the time, is that it?
I don't know if it's so much an aspect of time, but just what is required of us internally when we're constantly engaging
Okay.
with a different...
And what does that leave you with, that constant effort?
Personally,
Yeah.
various things. Off the top of my head, on the one hand, it's good. It's very good. It's a great opportunity. It's a great blessing to have this challenge.
Sure.
So there's the education. But then there's also a drain, because they're switching from internal energy versus a service energy. So when you're, versus using the divine, and that switch over happens, and it's the individual energy that's used, then the resources start to get tapped, and then it steps into the body and into the
Does it
mind
leave you
and
tired,
spirit.
fatigued?
Of course, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, anybody else at this point? Well, so the themes that I'm hearing repeatedly are those of unmet expectations that you may have of your clients, or sometimes that you may have of yourself. So the sense of frustration and sometimes failure and sadness that leaves you, that you're left with when you are unable to be as effective as you'd like to be in the face of a lot of pain and trauma. The constant frustration, the helplessness in the face of all this pain, in the sense that there's only so much that you can do and what you do is not adequate. The draining impact of the obligation of having constantly to being present for people, and then the frustration that you may experience with colleagues whose work styles you may not agree with, or you might even be critical of. Now, what I'm going to ask you to consider, these are all perfectly normal human responses, of course, and I think that all of you would be able to share the mind state that you've heard each other articulate, so that probably everybody spoke for everybody else here when they contributed. But I want to ask you to consider the following for a moment. Well, first of all, let me ask you that question. Just think about that for a moment, okay? The emotions that you described, the frustration, the sense of helplessness, the criticality, the sense of being drained, that is too much for you. Are these mind states new to you? Did they just come along with the job? Or have you ever experienced them before in your life? So, what would you say to that? Anybody finds that these are totally new feelings for you, never had them before in your life? Or do you recognize that you've had such experiences before? Because, let me tell you something. I'll tell you a story personally of when I was fired from a job and what happened for me. So I told you that I used to work as director of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, looking after terminally ill people. And I did that for 7 years. And I thought I was really good at, not only did I think I was good at the job, I was good at the job. And then I was fired. And I was fired because although I was good at what I was doing and I could help people out of pain and I could help families deal with dying, I didn't do my work in very orthodox ways. I just improvised a lot. Whatever seemed right to me, I just did it. Now the hospital has certain rules and certain procedures and so on. I could care less. I just did what I did, whatever I thought would work. And what I did work. But it was some of the very things that worked the best that I was challenged on, because it wasn't according to regulation. Now, after I was fired, I was full of rage. I was full of a sense of injustice. These people will not get away with it. I'm going to prove in court that I was right. I'm going to gather all the witnesses, all the nurses, all the patients, other hospital people, and I'm going to absolutely grind their faces into the dirt, and they're going to find out who they're screwing with, I'm going to win this one. And I was obsessing in my rage and sense of injustice, frustration, hurt. I was completely obsessed with this for a couple of months, and I was staying up late at night, sending away faxes and letters, and What happened was that it was also the same time that I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I decided to write a book about it. That was my first book, when I realized that I had ADD, and I realized that this wasn't a genetic disease, but it had to do with what I told you about, stress and all that. So I had this choice. Finally, one night I said to myself, okay, I could write this book, or I could put all my energy into fighting this court battle. Which would I rather do? Well, I decided, heck with it. I'd rather write the book. But all those feelings were still there. And even when I went walking with my dog, or in the park, I could be obsessing about nothing but how they were right, and how wronged I was, how unfair this was, how unjust this was, how frustrating this was. And then gradually something began to dawn on me. There seems something very familiar about this. I've had these feelings before. This feeling of I'm right and they're wrong, and I'm going to prove them wrong, and how unjust it is, and how not right it is, and how upsetting it is. This sense of being a victim. I realized, okay, wait a minute. This is an old brain circuit. This is nothing new about this. The situation is new, but these emotions are completely familiar to me. They're like mine. They've been mine all my life. So that's the first realization. The second realization was a bit more difficult, but it came upon the heels of the first, which is that actually I created my own firing. Beautifully. I created it beautifully. How did I create it? I created it because I had ADD. I was always in a rush, running around. The nurses said that working with me was like working in the middle of a tornado. They liked what I did, but the other physicians who didn't have the same kind of mind as I did, their minds work differently, more methodical, more rule-bound. They really didn't understand what I was doing. So they would question about, why are you doing this? Now, when they questioned why I was doing this, I didn't hear a question. What do you think I heard? What's that? That I'm wrong. I heard an attack. I didn't hear a question. I could have said, well, I'm doing this because they think, No, what I heard was an attack. Now, how do I respond when I'm attacked? I respond like a bulldog. I bite back and I don't let go. So the situation escalated. Had I only paid attention to what was going on, had I been aware, then I would have realized that nobody was attacking me. And even if they were, I could respond rationally instead of aggressively. And then I got aggressive in my response, and things came back to worse. It went from bad to worse, and I ended up engineering my own firing, which ended up being perfect for me, because 2 months later I got a phone call, would I come to work in the Vancouver downtown east side, which is how I ended up working with the addicted clients that I did for 12 years, and that became my last book. And it was a great experience in my life, and if I hadn't been fired, I wouldn't have taken that job. So it was perfect in every way. But the point I'm really making is that I created my own firing. It was all from the inside. It was all from the inside. They were wrong. To this day, they were wrong. They were wrong about the issues. The issues that they thought I handled badly, I really handled brilliantly, I would say. But that's not why I was fired. So in other words, those frustrations that I experienced on the job, they were not new to me. Those frustrations, that sense of helplessness in the face of injustice, what did that go back to? It went back to when I was 1 year old. And so I'm inviting you to consider that the frustration that you experience, not that it isn't genuine, not that the situations you describe aren't perfectly valid, not that anybody wouldn't find those challenges very difficult. Of course they would. There's nothing abnormal about that. But nevertheless, the emotions that you have, the upset that you have, the criticality that you have, the frustration that you have, and the helplessness that you have may have less to do with the present and may have much more to do with your own personal history, just like with me. So I want you to consider that. Now, that's the good news, and that's the bad news, and that's also the good news. The reason it's bad news is because it makes you responsible for how you feel. The reason it's good news is because it makes you responsible for how you feel. And what I mean by that is that it's much easier for the human mind to see the problem as being external, because then I don't get to be responsible for it. And the ego, the mind, doesn't want responsibility. Mine doesn't, yours doesn't. But it's also that lack of responsibility that leaves us feeling helpless. So the good news is that if we're responsible for how we react, if we are responsible for what we take on and how we respond, then we can actually change the situation internally without changing anything on the outside, which actually makes us a lot more powerful. Because as much as you try, you will never change the world. And I don't mean that in a negative, pessimistic way. I think all of us who are committed to social justice or fairness in this life, we want to change the world. And it's not that the world won't change. It's just that it's not going to change at our timetable. It's not going to change when we want it, in the way we want it, at the particular time we want it. That's not going to happen. What can change, of course, is that internal relationship to the whole thing. So what I'd like to explore with you today is we discuss this issue of vicarious trauma, the trauma that people experience as a result of working with a traumatized population. Is not how we can change the outside, because you're not. As long as you're doing this work, you're going to have really dysfunctional, traumatized youth who are incapable of following up, very often even given their best intentions, who are going to be frustrating you with their acting out behaviors, who will not meet your expectations. That's the nature of the work that you've got. You've chosen that work. And good for you that you have, because without you, these kids would be far more lost in this world than they already are. But that is the nature of the work. And as long as we're doing it, that's how it's going to be. You can't change how they are. What you can do, however, is you can possibly help create the conditions in which whatever capacity for change is in them can actually manifest itself. Because all human beings have the capacity for transformation. Everybody does. Even Stephen Harper does, although it's hard to recognize that sometimes. You know, even he's got the capacity for transformation, although he doesn't know it. But you can't transform anybody else. All you can do is to create the conditions where that transformation might happen. That's all you can do. When I say that's all you can do, that's a lot. But how you do that comes back to what I started the day with, was that it all starts within. It all starts within. So if we want to understand, so your very daunting, your very difficult challenge, the task that you've taken on, is actually how to stay open and compassionate and present with these very troubled young people that you're working with, without becoming stressed and traumatized yourself. That's not easy. As I said last night, and those of you that were there last night, there's going to be some obvious repetition today. One way to work with these people and not to be traumatized is for you to shut down emotionally so you just don't give a damn. You just do your job in a mechanical kind of, you show up on the job, you put in your 8 or 10 hours, whatever your shift is, and you do so in an emotional